Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating little biological glitch. How our brains naturally sabotage our own communication with false certainty. And, more importantly, we'll look at how we can actually fix it. We're going to break down the behavioral science behind why we always think we're right, using insights straight from some of the top minds in behavioral psychology and decision-making. So, let's just dive right in.
I want you to think back for just a second. When was the absolute last time you were in an argument or maybe just feeling super frustrated with a coworker or a partner and you used a word like always or never? You know the feeling, right? Saying something like, you never listen to me, or that idea is 100% wrong. We literally do this all the time. But behavioral science tells us that the moment we start talking in these extremes, we've actually stopped thinking clearly.
Words like always, never, certainly, or 100% wrong, these are what we really need to start treating as verbal sirens. When these absolute words come out of your mouth, it's a massive flashing warning sign. They're signaling that your brain has essentially stopped objectively observing reality. You're no longer dealing with the facts. Instead, you've started aggressively defending a fabricated story that your brain just made up on the spot. To really understand why we do this, we've got to look under the hood at how our brains process information.
To explain this, we turn to Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman's foundational concept of System 1. Think of System 1 as this impulsive, incredibly fast-talking character living inside your head. It operates automatically and rapidly, with little to zero effort and absolutely no sense of voluntary control. And here's the thing, System 1 completely hates ambiguity. It demands coherence and simplicity, and it wants answers right now, regardless of whether it actually has all the facts to back them up.
Now, contrast that hyperactive character with System 2. If System 1 is fast and impulsive, System 2 is basically your brain's highly intelligent but incredibly lazy supervisor. System 2 is slow, it's deliberate, and it's capable of really complex analysis. But sustaining doubt, examining nuance, and handling all that ambiguity requires System 2 to burn up a lot of mental energy. And because System 2 is so lazy, it usually just sits back and lets System 1 run the whole show, adopting its hasty, reflexive conclusions as absolute truths.
This classic illusion brilliantly shows just how fast and unconsciously System 1 is actually working. If you read the sequence on the left, you see A, B, C. In the sequence on the right, you see 12, 13, 14. But if you look really closely at the center symbol, you'll notice the B and the 13 are the exact same physical shape. Your System 1 didn't even pause to weigh that ambiguity. It instantly used the surrounding context, the letters on one side, the numbers on the other, to force a definitive, absolute interpretation before your conscious System 2 even realized what had happened.
Daniel Kahneman hit the nail on the head when he said, System 1 operates as a machine for jumping to conclusions. The measure of success for System 1 isn't accuracy, it's just the coherence of the story it manages to spin. When information is scarce, which, let's face it, is almost always the case in the real world, System 1 doesn't bother pausing to calculate doubt. It just rushes ahead to create a coherent, simplistic, black-and-white story so it can make sense of the world.
Part 1. Defending stories, not facts.
So what exactly happens when this biological drive for black-and-white certainty crashes into our messy, everyday interactions? Well, it pretty much ruins our communication. Borrowing a concept from the book Crucial Conversations, we have to learn to separate facts from stories. A statement like, Louis gave 95% of the presentation is a verifiable fact, right? Anyone watching a video recording of that meeting would agree. But a statement like, Louis doesn't trust me, well, that's a subjective story. It's a conclusion your System 1 jumped to just to explain Louis's behavior. The big problem is that we constantly treat our subjective stories as if they are absolute, verifiable facts.
So how do you know when you've slipped into defending a story? You look for what we call hot words, words like scowls, sarcastic, or controlling. If you say something like, she scowled at me, you're expressing a judgment. You're attributing intent, and that fires up strong emotions. You aren't stating a simple fact, like her lips tightened. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. When you start using these hot words or absolute terms like always and never, you're no longer communicating reality. You are aggressively defending an emotional narrative.
And that leads us right into a dangerous social trap known as conviction bias. Human nature expert Robert Greene points out that when people actually lack objective facts, they'll often mask their uncertainty with exaggerated absolute conviction. Think about it. If someone is trying to cover something up, they usually become extra vehement, incredibly righteous, and really loud. As humans, we naturally tend to mistake this intense absolute conviction for the truth, when in reality, it's often the ultimate sign of a fabricated story.
Part 2. The solution. Enter the decision swear jar.
Okay,
So we've mapped out the problem. Our brains are literally wired to jump to conclusions and fiercely defend false certainties. So how do we counteract this biological trap? For that, we turn to a brilliant behavioral strategy from decision-making expert Annie Duke. In her book, Thinking in Bets, Duke introduces this concept of a decision swear jar. Just like a regular swear jar makes you mindful of cursing, a decision swear jar is a mental pre-commitment to catch yourself using absolute language. You can't just magically turn off System 1's rapid-fire judgments, but you absolutely can use those verbal sirens, words like always, never, or 100% certain, as a tripwire. When you catch yourself thinking or saying those words, it's your cue to purposefully wake up that lazy System 2 and actually evaluate the situation deliberately.
Let's see how this actually builds into our daily language, straight from the Crucial Conversations playbook. The goal here is striking a really nice blend between confidence and humility. Instead of saying, "the fact is," which honestly sounds like a claim to absolute truth, you calibrate it down to, "in my opinion." Instead of "everyone knows," try something like, "I believe." The primary change here isn't necessarily dialing back the degree of your conviction, it's having the honesty and humility to acknowledge that your conclusion is just that. It's your conclusion, not some universal fact.
Part 3. Calibrating your confidence with shades of gray.
To really overcome this trap of absolute certainty, we have to consciously force System 2 to reintroduce shades of gray into our thinking. Here is exactly what that looks like in practice. A classic System 1 hot take sounds like, "Ramesh is always lazy. It's absolute and it's super emotionally charged." But if you apply the decision swear jar and take a step back, your System 2 takes over. You might instead say, "I am 70% confident that Ramesh is practicing productive hiding to avoid the FQ because he lacks confidence in doing it." Look at the huge difference there. We just transformed an emotional attack into a deliberately calibrated, nuanced observation.
Visualizing our beliefs as percentages, sort of like a donut chart showing 70% confident and 30% uncertain, is incredibly powerful. Seriously, it's a game changer. Why? Because it completely destroys that dangerous illusion of 0% or 100% certainty. By explicitly acknowledging that little 30% wedge of uncertainty, you're giving yourself psychological permission to learn new facts. If Ramesh suddenly performs brilliantly tomorrow, your whole worldview doesn't collapse. You just update your percentages. You remain open-minded.
You know, there's this great quote from comedian Daniel Kahneman, and it actually happens to be Daniel Kahneman's all-time favorite way to summarize the human condition. Her favorite position is beside herself, and her favorite sport is jumping to conclusions. It's funny because it is universally, painfully true. Our minds completely crave certainty, and they will sprint right past the facts to get there. But by recognizing this biological default and implementing tools like the decision swear jar, we can catch ourselves in midair before we land on a bad conclusion.
So, I want to leave you with one final, maybe slightly uncomfortable thought. What belief are you 100% certain of right now? Maybe about a colleague, a major project, or even yourself that might actually just be a story your System 1 made up. I challenge you to set up your own mental decision swear jar today. Listen closely for those verbal sirens. Catch yourself, wake up your System 2, and step back into the shades of gray, because ultimately, that's where the truth actually lives. Thanks for joining this explainer, and keep learning out there.